But yeah, my real baby.
Yeah.
All
right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Wasatch Beekeepers monthly meeting. We have a lot of wonderful information prepared for you. We're going to begin tonight's presentation with Peggy DeSanto. She's going to tell us all about the condensing hive, and then we've got some announcements and information about upcoming elections and the auction that's going to happen in November. We have our youth beekeeper, Belle, who's going to give a short presentation to us. So let's begin. So Peggy DeSanto is the co-founder of the Hive Hugger winterization system. This insulation system is founded in science and is unique in that it is based on the condensing hive approach. The product won the 2023 American Beekeeping Federation Award for Best Innovation, and it was awarded the University of Minnesota SARE grant, which is the Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education grant, which is a big deal as well. Peggy serves on the board of directors for the University of Minnesota Hobbyist Beekeepers Association. She presented at the Wisconsin Honey Producers Conference in 2023, and she'll be presenting at the Iowa Honey Producers Conference this fall and at the Midwest Honeybee Expo in January of 2025. So, Peggy, it's so nice to have you with us. I will stop sharing and allow you to set up your slides.
Okay, let's see. Can everybody see this okay? It's clear, yeah. Volume's good?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for having me. Nice to meet you all. As the introduction said, I'll be talking about the vented hive versus the condensing hive, and then an intro to the Hive Hugger winterization system we developed. So I have been a registered nurse for 37 years, a beekeeper for only 6. But it is my years of nursing that did lay the foundation for why I'm here today talking about beehive insulation. I have worked in the intensive care unit, emergency room, chemotherapy. And as a result of working in these areas, I have witnessed and been personally involved with like hundreds of people as they fought for their lives. Maybe I was doing chest compressions on them or giving chemotherapy to a 4-year-old. And it has changed me. In the core of my being, I know how precious life is. And not just human life, all life. So imagine how I felt that first year as a new beekeeper in Minnesota when I opened some of my hives and found tens of thousands of dead bees. Their deaths were on me. I'm hardwired to save lives. I was crushed. I cried. And so year after year, I tried multiple different winterization systems. These are not my hives, but they sure could be because I tried many of these techniques, including straw bales. What strikes me most as I look at these photos is we beekeepers will go through great lengths to try to protect our bees in the winter. And we struggle with just how best to do this. So despite trying a lot of different winterization techniques, I continue to lose about half of my hives every winter. And I learned I was not alone. According to the University of Minnesota Bee Lab, 50 to 60% colony loss is the average in northern climates in the winter. But something inside me said, you know, can't we do better by our bees? As serendipity would have it, I started dating a man who owns a business in high-tech insulation. And I thought, okay, well, what are the odds of that? So I took it as sort of like, you know, I'm supposed to do this. So with his support, we set out to develop the most effective winterization system like ever made. Besides being a nurse in the intensive care unit, I didn't share that I was also the instructor, where I would teach nurses to care for these extremely complex, critically ill patients. And everything we do in medicine to save lives is based in science. So as we started out on this quest to save honeybee lives, it was also very important that it was based in science. Being I'm from Minnesota, my first stop was actually the University of Minnesota Bee Lab. And when I asked for advice, like, where do I get started? Interestingly, they said, look into the research done by Bill Heschbeck. Bill is known as kind of the godfather of condensing hives. He wrote an article in Bee Culture magazine on winter management. So I've reached out to Bill. He has become a friend and a mentor of mine. He has tested this product for 3 years now with modifications and gives it 2 thumbs up. But besides Bill, I've gotten to know the research of Randy Oliver, Derek Mitchell, Tom Seeley, Etienne Tardif. I mean, there's a lot of research done on overwintering bees. The data's out there, and it's very consistent, it's current, and it's gotten very high tech. For example, now we have information gotten from infrared thermal imaging. So in the winter, we can see if there's areas of heat loss in our hives, where the cluster is it, how big is it? And then there's the whole world of sensors. These little green rectangles can give you the temperature and relative humidity in your hive every 10 minutes. And I want to talk about one researcher in particular. You're probably familiar with him, Etienne Tardif. He's located in the Yukon. Beekeeper, engineer, researcher, speaker. Specifically, his specialty is overwintering bees because he's in the Yukon. But what Etienne will do, he'll put 20 sensors, this is his slide, in a single hive. Then he'll repeat this on the next hive box. And then he'll just switch out how he overwinters that hive box. Ventilate, don't ventilate. Even modify the size of the ventilation hole. And as a result, he gets millions of data points. This slide is a cross-section. This is one of his slides. It's a cross-section of his beehive. And so every couple inches, he can tell you the temperature. He can tell you where the cluster is. He can tell you, are there ventilation channels? So there's really no longer a mystery what's going on inside of our hives in the winter. And in my opinion, the data is very clear. This is the optimal way to overwinter bees. And we've got the science to back it up. So what we did is basically build a system based on what science says we should do. Before I get into that, I want to very clearly call out that there are a lot of reasons for that high winter colony loss. Clearly, all these other factors. But I thought, if we could just put a dent in this cause, it was worth a try. So as I delved into the research, a very heated, excuse my pun, debate that came up again and again was, what is killing our bees in the winter? Is it the moisture? Is it wet bees? Or is it the cold? And, my guess is if I asked you all, there'd be a 50-50 split. And the truth is, you would all be right. According to the literature, you have to solve for both. And so the goal was, how do you solve for both? How to solve for both, I found it's best explained by giving sort of a relatable life example. So let's all say we're going to go on a road trip to the Yukon in January. We all pile in this bus. It's a long drive. We have a lot of time to talk, and we're all talking about beekeeping. So as a result, there's a lot of hot air in the bus. Pretty soon, the windows start to fog up. Condensation occurs. We can't see outside anymore. Side question, what is the temperature of the windows, the surface of the window, for this condensation to be collecting? The answer is dew point. And that term is really important to remember for later. Dew point is the temperature in which water vapor turns into liquid water. So as we're all sitting here digesting our supper, a byproduct of our metabolism is actually water vapor. We're breathing out water vapor. So when that water vapor hits the surface, maybe it's a cold can of pop. When it hits a surface that's cold enough to be at the dew point, that water vapor will turn into liquid water and condensation will form. So what do we do about it on the bus? Well, we ventilate, right? You all know you turn on the vent, bring in fresh air, not recycled air. We might crack the windows here. And so the warm, moist air in the bus pretty quickly gets replaced by cool, dry air, and then the condensation clears up. Great. But then what's happening? Well, it's getting cold, right? So let's bring this into a beehive. A byproduct of bees' metabolism is also water vapor. According to Randy Oliver, for every pound of honey that bees consume, they will produce 1.25 cups of water. And a certain percentage of that is actually in water vapor. So let's go inside a beehive. The bees are exhaling water vapor. And similar to the bus, if that water vapor hits a surface in the hive that's at the dew point, that water vapor is going to turn into liquid water. And if that's on the ceiling, that liquid water is going to drip down on our bees, and wet bees are dead bees, right? So we got to solve for this moisture. I haven't talked about cold yet, but clearly this is the moisture problem. Wet bees are dead bees. So how do many people solve for this moisture problem? Well, like on the bus, they ventilate. They drill holes in the hive boxes, might put on a quilt box with holes in it. But according to Derek Mitchell, he has his PhD in thermal fluids from Leeds University. And this diagram came from an article in American Bee Journal. And what happens when we poke holes in our hive boxes to ventilate, cold, dry air comes in the lower entrance and literally pushes up and out the moist, warm air. So you've got this constant source of heat loss. So it's called the chimney or stacking effect. Well, is that a big deal? Well, you know, in the bus, it's not a big deal because we have a gas-powered engine. We just crank the heat. But in a beehive, right, the bees are the gas. And how do they generate heat? Well, at a certain temperature, they'll form a cluster. Queen is in the middle. And then these heater bees, this is a thermographic image of a heater bee. The heater bee will vibrate its wing muscles to generate heat. Well, is that a problem? Well, according to the research, yeah, it is a problem. Etienne, he says, heater bees can work themselves to death. That metabolic stress can lead to metabolic death. Bill Heshbick says in one of his talks, in non-insulated, ventilated hives, the bees have to put forth an extraordinary amount of effort to keep the colony alive all winter. And they will pay for it by dying earlier in the spring. This is probably the most interesting thing I learned. And this again comes from Derek Mitchell's research. He says this cluster is actually a survival mechanism we beekeepers impose on the bees by not providing them enough thermal support. He says in very well-insulated hives, they don't cluster at all. Etienne Tardif agrees. He said in his well-insulated, non-ventilated hives, the bees' resting metabolism is enough to maintain their internal environment, which basically means in a well-insulated colony, the bees just being bees, living life, there's a certain amount of heat that's generated as they metabolize, is enough to sort of keep their hive warm enough. And so if that's the case, then they are not clustering. This is Etienne's slide. His bees are loosey-goosey roaming around the hive all winter. They're not going into this clustering response, which is a very significant implication as to sort of what is cold exposure and poorly insulated hives doing to our bees. This research study was done in Australia, and it really drives the point home pretty well, and I will orient you to this chart. This horizontal axis is temperature. This is Celsius, so I gave you the Fahrenheit conversions. This is temperature. This is metabolic rate of the bee. Like, how hard are they working? And so if I can draw your attention to this point where the line kind of splits axis, at around 60 degrees and colder, here's 60 to 50 degrees, you can see that the metabolic rate, how hard the bees are working, starts to like exponentially go up really sharply. If this is 50 degrees, where is minus 10, right? Or even 0 degrees. So below 60, the bees are working really hard. Contrast that to warmer than 60 degrees. Yeah, you know, they're getting a little bit more active, certainly, but nothing like this side of the chart. And so to kind of take this home into your beehive, when the bees are exposed to temperatures, again, 50 to 55 degrees, this comes from Etienne, they start to cluster. So I said, like, at a certain temperature, they're going to cluster. Well, it's less than 60. It's about 55 degrees. They start to cluster, vibrate their wing muscles to generate heat. And then this high metabolic demand means more honey consumption. Because for the bees to work this hard, they need an energy source. And that energy source is honey. The colder they are, the harder they work, the more food they're going to eat. Contrast that to if you keep your bees above 60, not clustering, very low honey consumption, because they just don't need it, right? They're not working that hard. So very important data that, you know, if you sell honey as a, you know, as part of your income, this is a game changer. This data is important. So I already talked about detrimental effects of cold or ventilating our bees, increased honey consumption. But what I didn't say is that with increased honey and water, because in order to eat honey, they have to consume water to dilute it, will come increased waste products. And with limited opportunities for cleansing flights, which is a problem here in Minnesota, you can risk dysentery and spreading nosema. And cold exposure, your bees, there's a risk for freezing to death. What happens is, you know, and this might not be that pertinent where you live, depends on where, but at 14 degrees, that cluster gets to its maximum tightness. Like, it can't get any tighter. And if the cold exposure, the threat persists, this outer layer of bees will just drop off because they've gone into a chill coma. And until that, you just have a pile of dead bees at the bottom of your hive. Or they freeze to death because that cluster is so tight, it can't even move. And it will like freeze to death an inch away from its honey, right? And people go, oh, well, my bees starved to death. No, they didn't starve to death. They froze to death because they were too cold to move. However, starving to death is also a negative outcome of cold bees. And what that looks like is, remember the other slide, is they're just going to eat a lot of honey. And they might just deplete your entire honey stores that you left for the winter, and then they'll starve to death. Another research study about cold exposure, this was done by the USDA just last year, published in Bee Culture. And this research study said the increased energy that overwintering bees need to use to maintain their hive temperature reduces the energy they have for immune function. So cold bees are more susceptible to diseases, infections, and higher winter colony losses. So, you know, bees in poorly insulated or uninsulated hives can make it through winter, but at what cost? Another important thing to know about cold exposure and how that stresses your bees happens in the spring. And it's actually, at least in the north here, spring is the most common time of the year that beekeepers lose their colony. And it's because in the spring, the queen starts laying eggs, and these old winter bees, like we're talking 200 days old now, and if they were cold, they're old and stressed. So these old stressed winter bees need to activate their glands to take care of baby bees. And they have to maintain the hive temperature to 95 degrees, right? We all know the brood needs to stay in the brood zone about 95 degrees. And if they can't maintain that temperature, they'll just quit trying. Without replacement brood, the whole colony will perish. And this is a kind of an interesting slide. We still have, research hives out there. And just to orient you, those green rectangles that track temperature and humidity, this is what the data looks like. And I know it looks overwhelming, but I will orient you. The bottom axis is the date. This vertical axis is the temperature inside the beehive. This bottom slashed blue line is the outside temperature, okay? And all of these squiggly lines are separate hives, the temperature of just a bunch of different hives, the temperature inside the hive. And you can see, here we're at 0 degrees. So you just see the temperatures in the hive are all over the place. But March, maybe 10th or 11th, something happens here where all but 2 or pretty close to 2 of the hives committed to raising brood. These couple look like they started even earlier. But look at this black one, like all over the place. Boy, hit this date and steady Eddie. Like these bees will do whatever it takes to keep the hive in this temperature range. Here it got 10 degrees, right? So if they're unable to maintain that temperature, the colony's in trouble because they will work themselves to death to try to make it happen. So that's a very confusing time of the year for beekeepers to lose their colony because they're like, well, it was 0 degrees, they did fine, and now it's 10 or 20 degrees, and it's March or April, and my whole colony died. It's because the thermal dynamics of the hive are very different of what's needed for the worker bees in spring versus the dead of winter. So if you insulate, don't be in a rush to take it off in the spring because it's a very, very vulnerable time for your bees. The last negative effect I want to talk about venting and actually putting a bunch of moisture absorbing materials in your hive is your bees risk actually life-threatening dehydration. There's reports of bees flying out of the colony in a desperate attempt to bring water back in their hive because they need it, as I mentioned, to consume honey and to remain hydrated. So clearly, venting, yes, it gets rid of moisture, but in doing so, gets rid of precious water and leads to life-threatening cold exposure. Remember the chimney effect? And so it looks like the bees agree. There's a lot of reports of them propolizing up the upper entrances. This is an apame hive where they also don't want those vents open. So venting our hives does not solve for both. It actually, it gets rid of moisture, but it sort of hurts our bees by doing so. And it absolutely doesn't solve for cold. In fact, it exacerbates the cold issue. So, well, if we aren't venting our hives, how do we manage moisture in the hive? And the key, according to the research, is you insulate, but in a very specific way. And that's what brings us back to dew point. you super insulate the top of the hive to keep the ceiling above dew point, right? Super insulate, ceiling stays toasty warm. You also insulate the sidewalls, but not as much. So that when condensation does occur in the hive, because it will, because we want it to, it will condense on the cooler walls. And remember, in a well-insulated hive, the bees aren't clustering at all. They're free to roam around, so the bees can crawl over to the sidewalls and drink the moisture that's condensing there. So super insulating the top of the hive keeps the bees dry, and then insulating the sidewalls, but less, keeps them warm and dry, and has access to the much needed moisture. And the research is really consistent about this. So the key to solving for both, and Bill Heschbeck calls it a condensing hive because you're allowing the condensation to occur. And so the key is create a condensing hive setup. So John Gott, he's a master beekeeper out east. He did this research study. It was published in American Bee Journal a couple of years ago. But what John did, he's a big fan of condensing hives. He took some of his hives, put a plexiglass panel over the hive box, and then super insulated some, the top, and then didn't super top insulate others. And then at some point in the winter, he took off the insulation and looked at the plexiglass. And this is a photo of the super top insulated hive, very little condensation, really none in the middle, and just some on the periphery, versus the hive without good top insulation, full of condensation. And this next slide is a little video that John did of the hive that was well top insulated to show you that the bees indeed do come over here and drink this water, and that they're free roaming around in there.
This bee's drinking some of the condensate from the edge of this hive, which is probably a water bottle bee. These bees will store the water and use it as needed in a cluster, probably mostly to thin the honey, so it can be consumed by the other bees. This is a clear inner cover without a vent. Two temperature sensors in here. One's measuring both the temperature and the humidity, and the other's just the temperature.
This video, I mentioned Randy Oliver earlier, but I'm sure you know of him. He's a brilliant researcher in California and really an expert on everything beekeeping. But this is an excerpt from one of his talks when somebody asked him about using upper entrances. And it's just a short clip of his answer.
Yes, go ahead. Randy, you made the comment that top entrances might not have value.
Yeah.
Why would you say that?
Because looking at all the research, there's very few places in the world where there's been any findings that suggest they actually do have a value. When you put a top entrance and a bottom entrance in, that's like imagine you live in a 2-story house during winter. Don't take my word for this. Try this, okay? Is it cold in your area now?
Yes.
Okay, so turn off the heater, open the front door, and open the top window, and see how it feels living in that house.
What about the moisture content? How's the condensation getting out of the hive?
So there's no reason for condensation if the hive is insulated enough. So generally, top insulation will put the condensation to the outside of the hive, to the where it reaches dew point temperature. That's the moisture the bees need in order to have enough moisture during the winter.
Okay. I figured if Randy says it, you'll believe him more than me. So, all right. So the key is insulate. So the next question is, well, how much, right? I hear her high, a lot on the top and less on the sidewalls. And before I talk about how much, I want to just explain how insulation is measured. And that's in something called R value. R stands for resistance. How much resistance does a material offer against heat loss? And it actually measures an inch of this against an inch of this. And so I gave you some R values of common beehive insulation products. Tar paper has an R value of 0. Wood chips, straw, snow, 1 to 2. Cardboard and fiberglass, 3 to 4. And you might be like, oh, wow, cardboard's a 3, 4, that's pretty good. But again, that's an inch of cardboard, not just a single ply. And then foam boards, R value 4 to 5. So looking at the benefits of insulating your hives, this research study was done in Illinois a couple of years ago, and they basically looked at non-insulated hives versus insulated hives. And it showed that the insulated hives had a 22.5% improvement in colony survival. And a twofold reduction in just bee population decline. So even if the colony made it, there was twice fewer bees in the non-insulated hives. Remember the metabolic death? Bill Heshbeck said your bees will die sooner. This proves that they do. And then the third thing they measured is honey consumption. And the insulated hives consume significantly less food stores. Another research study that sort of looked at, quantifying or the benefits of insulating was Tom Seeley. I'm sure you know him. He's got his PhD in biology at Cornell, well-published, well-known speaker. He did a couple research studies. First one was in 1976, where he asked the question, well, bees have evolved for millions of years to survive and have clearly survived in northern climates. So when bees choose a natural tree cavity, what are the qualities of that? And so they just cut open tons of trees and just measured. And the qualities of a natural tree cavity, curiously, there was this, he calls it an infinite amount of insulation above the colony. It might be many, many feet of wood. Remember super top insulation? The walls of the enclosures were very, very thick, and they liked trees that were still living. And these natural tree cavities had entrances only at the bottom. And so then in 2022, he did a deeper dive asking, okay, well, now we know sort of the qualities of natural tree cavities. What if beekeepers wanted to make their Langstroth hive much closer to the home of a natural honeybee? That's what he wanted to research. And so they came up with numbers. He said, in order to do this, we need to provide an R30 on the ceiling and an R10 on the sidewalls in order to mimic a natural bee colony. And again, he said, no upper entrances. We are not ventilating. Bees don't use vent. They don't vent their cavity, natural tree cavities. So now we've got some numbers. Curiously, Etienne Tardif, that I've talked about, he's in the Yukon. This is one of his slides. And Etienne up in the Yukon gets 90 to 100% survival. And he does not use upper ventilation, R30 above the hive, same as the Seeley study. And you can say he purposely calls out that he uses condensing walls on purpose. And then an R10 to 20 on the sidewalls. Seeley was an R10. So similar recommendations. So those research studies and others kind of informed the design of what we created. Seeley's study was done in zone 5, Etienne zone 1, 2. I'm in Minnesota, which is 3, 4. Utah, yeah, you guys are probably, maybe 6. So our product was really designed for zones 1 through 5. And so we can talk afterwards, kind of in your climate zone, what might be appropriate or needed. So I spent a fair amount of time talking about the science behind a condensing hive, because it's, at least in the north here, people are ventilators. That's just, everybody does it. And so for me to sort of say, hey, stop doing a practice you've been doing for a long time, I just don't think that's fair to expect people to have a new way of doing things without knowing the science behind it. So I wanted to spend a fair amount of time, discussing that. But so the next part of the talk, I'm going to just talk about the hive hugger itself. And basically it's two components, the top panel and then the side wrap. So the top panel is made of a product, and this is where my partner came into the picture. It's made of something called a vacuum insulation panel, and it has the highest R value. It's the most effective insulation ever created. And how that works is, in a vacuum, there are no air molecules. And without air molecules, like heat transfer, can't take place, or it's greatly slowed down. So think of thermoses. Thermoses are vacuums. And so that's why they're super great insulators. So some brilliant person said, well, why don't we make an insulation panel a vacuum? And then we'll have a wicked high R value insulation panel. So a 1-inch vacuum panel is an R46. Remember, foam boards are 4 to 5 and fiberglass is 3. So it's out of the ballpark, efficient insulation. So this is information from the manufacturer. As I mentioned, 10 times more efficient than traditional insulation. Refrigerators who have these panels use 50% less energy. Shipping containers can keep things at a constant temperature for up to 5 days. And if not punctured, they have a service life for up to 50 years. So they'll last a long time. Curiously, Yeti is putting vacuum insulation panels in their coolers. So if you're wondering why Yeti has such a super, over and above cooler, this is the reason. But they're also $800 cooler. So there's that. So the panel we specifically made for the bee industry, we only made it 3/4 of an inch. And so it's an R32. Remember, an inch is 46, 3/4 of an inch is about a 32. And so it's custom cut to fit over the wooden inner cover. And then obviously the outer cover will go on top of that. And again, besides, wanting to keep this above the dew point, 75% of the heat loss is the top of the hive, right? Heat rises. So if you're gonna insulate one place on your beehive, you want to do the top. So this year, we also are creating and we call it the crown. If you see the sticker, it's because it's the top of the hive. It's shiny, kind of in honor of the queen bee. So we also created a vacuum insulation panel for the Apame hive, and it's also being used now in the top bar and Layens hives. So Apame, as you know, is vented. It converts a vented Apame hive into a condensing hive. Same with the Layens or top bar hives. You have to plug up these vents and seal around this, but then you can also, and we had people last year doing this setup in both of these hive styles and had very excellent results. So, they're compact. This is 3 crown panels compared to the equivalent of what that would be in foam boards. They're mouse and ant proof, and they are eco-friendly. There's nothing toxic in these panels. But I do want to say that there's nothing magical about these panels other than they're very thin. You can easily, one of the beekeepers sent me this picture. He was super proud of his DIY. Just put the equivalent of foam board on the top of the hive, or you can take an empty hive box and cut it and sort of stuff it inside the the extra hive box. And then just don't vent, and then put a wrapper on there, and you've got a DIY. This person's mom has alpacas or something, so she was going to do a couple hive boxes of wool. I had a beekeeper who he said, Peg, last year 18 of my hives survived. Thank you so much. I said, oh, I'm so glad you love the product. And he said, well, I didn't buy any of your product, but I did the DIY like this, and he had excellent outcomes. So my mission is to help beekeepers save bees. If you buy the product, that's great, but it's not why I got into this. And I really, it's for the education part. I'm going to be 60. I'm going to retire in a couple of years. And so I don't know what I'm doing a startup business at this age. That's still, I'm not clear, but I think it's really to help educate people on a better way of overwintering. So the second component is the wrap. And so like the vacuum insulation panels, you cannot get those at Home Depot. They're a very high specialized, panel, but the side wraps, and that's why people, again, easy to DIY it. We just use 1.5 inch expanded polystyrene. And we have 2 densities, standard density, high density. So that's our 7 to 8. Add the wooden hive box, gives it an R value to 8, 9, which is pretty close to the 10 that's recommended. And they're nice because the corners are water jet cut like this. And so they fit together really nicely like puzzle pieces. And as I mentioned, we also have this system made for the top bar hive where we put our panels just sort of screwed on with these fender washers. So we also have a Lands Hive hugger wrap. And so another little piece, it's sort of about the product, but it's also, I wanted to sort of weave in some more data for you. The biggest wrap we sell is a double deep. And we have a lot of beekeepers saying, oh, I need a triple deep or a triple in a medium. But the research is super clear that you want to have the amount of bees match the volume of the hive box. This is Etienne's. Too few bees and too big of a volume will result in winter failure. So come fall, assess how big your colony is, and then overwinter in the hive box configuration that matches that. Etienne has his best success in single deeps. And so a research study, this was done in Egypt, but they looked at this. And this research study conclusion was, it was observed that the maximum amount of hive temperature stayed warmer, more honey, pollen, and brood were achieved by using the smallest internal beehive size. So, think about it. Do you want to heat a 3-story mansion or a tiny bungalow? It's just so much easier for the bees to thermodynamically sort of manage smaller spaces. So, when people call and say, I need a triple deep, I talk them out of it. I just say, a lot of your bees are summer bees, they're drones. They aren't going to be around come winter. So the product comes in double deep, a single plus a medium, 3 mediums, and then just a single deep anyway, and 8 frame double deep. So important thing. I see this happening a lot, that people are overwintering in too many hive boxes. So I went over sort of the research that informed the design of the product, but I want to just share some of the research we've done on the product as well. This is our very first winter. Like I said, we're a new business. It's a new product. And these are not my bees. I didn't even know about these sensors. It's a friend of mine in Wisconsin who does cutouts. And so again, I'll orient you, date, temperature. This time the pink line is outside temperature. The 2 top hives are actually hive hugger hives. These other colored lines are this guy's other colonies. But curiously, he's very well educated, well informed. He's been doing condensing hives forever. So these are also condensing hives, but he does an R10 on the ceiling. and R5 on the sidewalls. And so clearly, they're doing pretty good. They're well above outside ambient temperature, but this is the difference between an R30 and an R10. And remember, the data is like, you just need an R30. And I want to bring you back to that slide where it said, when bees are hanging in the 50, below 60, they're going to cluster and they're in the stress response, vibrating their wing muscles. So even though this guy's insulating his hives, look at what temperature these bees are running at. This is 50 degrees. So they're insulated, but they're still in the survival response. Versus the hive hugger hives, this is 75 degrees. They are absolutely in the high 60s, if not low 70s. Even here, it's 0 degrees. And the bees really didn't seem to notice. And in the spring, he weighed his colonies. So he weighs them in the fall and he weighed them in the spring. And he said the hive hugger hives consumed 50% less honey. He said he opened the top cover and it felt like a sauna. This hot air came rushing out of the colony. So very compelling. And this data is the reason I got the SARE grant. I brought it to the University of Minnesota, Marla Spivak sitting next to me, right? And she's like, get the data, Peggy. And they wrote me a letter recommendation. I got the biggest SARE grant, to continue the research. So the next year, instead of doing condensing hive to condensing hive, I kind of knew the data. What we studied is actually ventilated hives, Bee Cozy, Reflectix, tar paper, and similar results, but I mean, not really. I mean, at least the other condensing insulated hives were a little bit different than outside ambient temperature. But look what happens when we vent our hives. There's really not a huge difference between the temperature outside and inside our hive. Versus, again, the hive hugger hives, just consistently, significantly warmer, similar, less honey consumption, stronger spring colonies. Again, the queen she'll start laying. What she looks for is called a flat lining. She doesn't want a lot of these unpredictable temperatures. So if she's like, hey, it's safe, stable, warm temperatures, they brood much earlier. So the thing beekeepers aren't used to when they use hive hugger is they're like, oh my gosh, I opened my colony in March and we already had brood. And now I have to do a split and a month earlier than I normally would. It's a new problem to have, but it's a good problem to have. So that's really it. The scientific literature, as well as our own research, shows that indeed well-insulated condensing winter setups, better mortality, stronger spring colonies, queen lays earlier, less honey consumption, and then the bees have access to much needed water. So these are my some of the references that were used in the development of the product. You're recording this, so you'll have access to look these up. And then I do want to share, this is our sales last year. Almost every state is purchasing, which I didn't see that coming. But Texas says, well, we got snow. I mean, beekeepers are these erratic weather patterns. It's unpredictable. And they just want assurance and peace of mind. But we sold 1,200 units last year, and the majority of our sales this fall are repeat customers. And I got many, many emails from beekeepers just saying that they had extremely good outcomes. So if you want to look at the website, it's hivehugger.com. This is my email address. Happy to, answer any questions you might have, because like I said, it's a new way of winterizing. And so happy to talk to you about it. I thank you for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity to share this information. I do have a little 5-minute setup guide. If there's time and you want to see how the products sort of put on, I can do that. Or we can break and answer questions. So I'll sort of stop there and see what your group would like to do next.
I'd say do the 5-minute setup and then take questions.
Do the setup guide?
Yeah, please.
Okay. think it's the next slide. All right.
Hello, I'm Peggy DeSanto, co-founder of the Hive Hugger Winterization System. This is a brief setup guide on how to put the Hive Hugger products onto your beehive. Since this is a condensing hive setup, the first step is to tape or plug all entrances with the exception of the lower entrance. Trim the hive plug so that it's flush with the hive box. Next, remove your outer cover. Take this foil rectangle and place it over the hole in your wooden inner cover. This will keep the bees down into the beehive. Next, you take your crown panel and you place it on top of the wooden inner cover. Then you take your roll of Tyvek that comes with your kit and tape around the seams to prevent air leakage, which will help reduce heat loss. And as you're taping around the seams, make sure that you cover the hole that's in the wooden inner cover. Next, you take your entrance reducer and set it so the 4 3/4 inch opening is on top. So it will be inverted like this. Next, place your mouse guard. Then you set up the foam boards. I find it easiest to place the front foam board and the side foam boards first, while in the back of the hive, so you're not in the way of the bees' entrance. Then I take the belt and I loop it through these corner guard strap holders, starting in the back left corner. Then I lift it up as one unit and slip it over the hive box. Then I take the back piece and secure that in place. Once the foam boards are in place, tighten it down with the strap so that they're nice and snug against the hive box. Lastly, replace the outer cover. Like that. If you would like to learn more about the condensing hive, there's a video on the website under the science tab that goes over the science behind a condensing hive versus the venting hive. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Peggy DeSanto, co-founder.
Oops. Oh, well, I'll leave this up. We can look at more tips anyway. So any questions I'll go over these since they popped up. I'm conscious of the time, but I do want to share that if your hive is really sick, keeping them warm is not going to help them get through the winter. So do your best to manage mites and diseases. People ask, well, when do you insulate? And again, remember that 50 to 55 degrees and they're starting to cluster. So when the outside temps are consistently in the 50s, put on insulation because you're stressing them unnecessarily. Yeah, there's no reason not to really. So another tip I learned is don't set your hive boxes on metal, cement, or concrete. The hive will lose heat through contact with these materials. So if you have a concrete blocks, put like a foam board or some wood 2x4s, and then set your hive box, your hive on top of a different material, so it's not directly on the hive box. And then in Minnesota, we overwinter in 80 to 100 pounds of honey for a double deep and 60 to 80 for a single deep. And honey is a great thermal mass. It just holds on to the heat. So it's better to put extra honey just for the thermal mass than put in empty frames. And I will tell you the majority of people, when they open their colony, if they leave this much, have surplus honey. The bees won't use it all, but it's nice to have it in there for the thermal mass. So harvest honey, or again, I'm sorry if this is really not pertinent for where you live, but here we say harvest in August and give the time, let the bees have plenty of opportunity to build their winter stores. So with that, I will be done talking and have open it up for any questions you might have.
Question online says, do you insulate the bottom of the hive at all?
Oh yeah. Oh, do we insulate the bottom of the hive? We don't, but it's better. It would be better. But we just haven't. And the data is pretty compelling. It doesn't look like you kind of need to. But if you can and you have access to foam boards, that's great. But no, ours, a lot of the research hives are sitting on pallets out in remote areas. And so, no, they're sitting on pallets. So no, we don't, but it would be better if you did.
I couldn't hear you.
They're solid bottom boards, not screen bottom boards.
Are they
You know-
solid boards?
Bill Heschbeck has a 50-50 mix of both. In our research hives, we probably had a pretty even mix of both. And there was no difference in the data. As long as you slide the panel in the screen bottom board, didn't seem to matter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Why don't you use it all of the time in the summer and winter?
Well, that's a good question. Clearly, people who use polyhives and apame hives say the bees are just happier year round, that the insulation keeps them cooler in hot weather climates. In Minnesota, it just doesn't get that hot in the summer, that we don't suffer from heat stress. So there's that. I can tell you, though, I've had reports of beekeepers who are using the product to help keep their bees cooler in the summer too. We just haven't studied it. Well, no, that's not exactly true. Randy Oliver did a small study seeing if it helped improve like productivity and colony strength. But he got him on late, like even late August, early September, and a portion of his hives were in the shade. And so he didn't really see any obvious outcome from that using the crown panel. And so he said it was inconclusive. And then actually I had a guy in Tennessee, again, not big numbers, but he wanted, because it's not humid there. It's sort of hot, but it's not humid. And Tennessee's hot and humid. And this beekeeper, he said, initially the insulation, stronger, more robust. He said, happier bees. But at some point in the summer, he lost the benefit wasn't obvious, and 2 of the hive hugger hives died. There was no evidence on that because we had broodminder sensors. We were tracking all that. There was no sort of sign like they got hot or, we don't know. I don't know. Maybe they died for something other reason. But again, it was inconclusive. I even talked to Randy, like, why isn't it yielding really obvious data? And he doesn't know. And so even though the studies probably were inconclusive, we didn't have big enough numbers. I can't advertise and won't advertise that'll keep your bees cooler in the hot weather climates because we specifically don't have data. You're welcome to use it because a lot of beekeepers are, but that's why I don't specifically have the research, and I feel like I would need to in order to try to market it and sell it that way.
We have another question? Yeah.
One of the early slides, there was a graph of temperature versus, I think it was metabolic energy expended.
Yeah.
What was that measured?
How was it measured? Ooh, I have the research study. I'll have to look at, should we go back to it and see if it was on that? Did it say on the slide? You're obviously a smart guy who kind of knows those, oh, here it is. Here.
Maybe a map.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So do these units look familiar? A 0.002? I apologize. I don't know, but I do have this full research study, so I can email you guys back and give you that information. I can look it up. Good question. Do you have a guess? Do you have an idea on how they measured metabolic rate?
Sound? I don't know.
Oh, okay.
It could
Yeah.
have been just the amount of honey at the beginning of the study and amount of honey left at the end to get an idea of metabolic.
So
I would say it's the cluster. I would say they're clustering and trying to vibrate to stay warm, and that's using more, their metabolic rate is up versus when they don't have to do that, they're not using as much energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just by,
Yeah. Is it, it's in your citation list. Do you recall which number in your citation list?
Myers cough. Let's see. I do not see it here unless somebody else does. Huh. Well, I don't see it here, which is curious, but yeah, I will forward that on to you guys because I know it wasn't honey consumption because I read the study and it wasn't that. And I do remember it was a complicated formula. So it was deducted, or there was some deducing to come up with these numbers, but it wasn't based on honey consumption. But I apologize. I don't remember how they measured that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Your setup kind of looked like, does it allow for the bees to come out in the winter, like on warmer days? It kind of looked like it covered the bottom entrance.
Yeah, no, the bottom entrance. So on the hive, like the bottom board, they're a little maybe 3/4 of an inch sort of stoppers. So no, the whole lower entrance is open. Yeah, you do need fresh air intake. The bees absolutely need fresh air. So the lower entrance is kept open. It looks like it slides down, but it doesn't. I don't know. You can kind of see here. Yeah, it's open.
You talked about zones. I live in the city, and so it's probably closer to a zone 7.
Okay.
5 or 6, I still think we're.
pretty close to 6.
Yeah.
There's 6. Okay.
Right downtown. But I just didn't know if it would be helpful for for that hive is only.
Yeah, Ashley.
So I'm in 5. I had hive hunters on 2 of my 6 hives last year. And they did great, but I'm in zone 5 and it's really cold. But I think at least the crown would benefit any hive. The benefit of that.
Yeah, we have a lot of people just buying the crowns. So I don't know if they're in warmer climates and that's all they're doing. My guess is that's all they're doing, because that's probably all they need in these zones down here. So yeah, I think that's a very reasonable solution. Because again, 75% of the heat loss is the top of the hive. And if you don't get your winters are mild, that's probably all you need.
So just to confirm, the takeaway here is that you want your top to be above condensing and your sides to be condensing, but not so much that all the water drips out the bottom.
No, well, so and this is getting a little bit into the weed level, but the warmer the temperature, warm air actually holds more moisture. So, so the warmer air, there's actually less condensing down happening than in a cold hive. That's why you have to, if your hive's cold, you have to ventilate because there's going to be condensation like crazy. So no, there's no water running out of their hive. There's no ice dams. It's curiously, and Etienne's research says the bees actually can manage pretty closely the humidity levels. They'll ventilate like they do in summer. And if they need more moisture, they'll let the temperature drop a little bit so more condensation happens. They're extremely sophisticated and good at it. So yes, in a condensing hive, you want the condensation to happen on the walls, but it's not a ton. It's not a ton. Yeah, there isn't water dripping out of the bottom of your hive. Certainly, which is you'd think it is by the name of it, but it's not the case at all.
So
And then what's that?
A lot of people here use candy boards as sort of the insurance, you know, that if bees can't make it to the sides where honey is stored, at least they could go up to get food. But your hives or your pre-made structures don't allow for that. Is that correct?
Well, it's not necessarily don't allow for it. I mean, they don't need it. They don't need emergency feed because again, I guess if you're leaving enough honey, but we have beekeepers who first year, the bees didn't make enough honey to overwinter on, and then you absolutely need backup emergency feed with candy boards. So what we can do, or what we recommend doing, is just prop up the wrap, just put a rock or some sticks just to prop it up to cover the shim or whatever the candy board height is, and so that the insulation's protecting the top of the hive, and have the lower part be the inch or however much the depth of the candy board is. So yes, you absolutely can use them, and do use them if you need that, as emergency feed. But it's it's typically not needed as long as you have enough honey. And that's what we talk about. Again, unless you're a new beekeeper or you got robbed or something, we really just plan ahead to make sure that they have enough honey to overwinter on. Pull the honey supers earlier, start feeding 2-to-1 sugar syrup, have them build up their honey stores, just to ensure that they have enough for overwintering on. But yeah, that's not always feasible.
All right.
If you overwinter in one box, how many frames of honey do you need in one box? Versus like, let's say they still have a little bit of brood left when you close them up for the winter.
Yeah. Oh, like if you have a little bit of brood left, for a single, we would like to see 7 frames of honey, and that, if you have 2 halves to equal a whole, that we say a frame of honey is about 7 pounds. So 7 times 7 is about 50. So yeah, minimum 7 to get them through, but more is better.
Any other questions? Oh,
there-
that's
some-
it. Thank you, Peggy.
I
Oh,
have
one more.
random- This is super random, but I've been looking at the Slovenian bee houses. Is that kind of the same idea as this, do you know?
You know, I've had one beekeeper with a Slovenian bee houses, but his were ventilated and they didn't do well. And so we tried having him plug up the vents and then doing the high R value. And so, and actually I haven't heard from him, so I don't know how they did. I hope they did better, but his were vented a lot. And so I don't know if it's Slovenia, if they have cold winters like they do here, but it also was a vented system. And he had extremely poor outcomes year after year. So yeah. Are yours vented, your Slovenian hives?
Have them yet, but I'm just. Were his vented on the outside or on the inside of the house?
Well, he had like vent tubes going from the hive outside, like there were holes in if you're looking at the outside of the little box, you could see the ventilation holes for each individual colony. So, yeah. So they were vented to the outside ambient air.
Have you had any problems with mold?
You know, very little. I mean, this is a funny story. I had a beekeeper who he had 4 hive huggers, and he was emailing me throughout the winter saying, and he had temperature, humidity sensors. He says the humidity is like 88%. It was extremely moist, and the temperatures were running in the high 80s as well, just like a hot house. And I said, I have no good explanation. None of our research sites have run that humid or that hot. And then he opened up his colonies and the wooden inner cover was full of mold and slimy mold. But he said one of his hives was super weak and super small, and they all came through super robust. He couldn't believe it. But what's with this mold? And then later he says, oh, I forgot to tell you, I saran wrapped the heck out of it. Every little vent possible. And so they literally, yes, because there was no place for the moisture to go at all. And that slimy mold, the bees were super healthy. They didn't seem to mind it. And the research, and I didn't put this in here because it's just small studies, but the research says at a relative humidity above 78%, Varroa has a difficult time reproducing. And so I think another reason to have a high humidity hive, but he said, I'm not going to do it next year because that was crazy. But clearly the bees thrive in very warm and very moist environments in the winter. I can't say that's true like in Tennessee, no, but in the winter, you know, if they get to be in the high 80s temperature and relative humidity. But him aside, there have been reports of just a little bit of mold, again, of the 1,200, maybe 3 or 4 people on the wooden inner cover, but just a smidge of it, not much. And rarely reported.
One of my hives I sealed up real tight, like you described last year, and I had to throw out frames. They were so gross.
Oh, they were moldy. Oh, and you saran wrapped and sealed it super tight too?
It was an experiment.
Oh, but did your bees do good?
Yeah, the middle frames where they were okay, but like the outer frames that had been emptied, I think I 4 frames on.
That's so great that there's people who've used the product on this call and can share your experience. Yeah, we had another woman who taped every seam possible. She had a little bit of mold, but the majority of people really, they just don't. It hasn't been an issue, curiously. But again, yeah, no, that's all I'll say, is it really isn't an issue.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was
Yeah.
great.
Thank you for having me. Email or call if you have any further questions. Happy to try to answer them. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And
All right.
then I will go ahead and leave your meeting, but thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye. All right.
Take a view on yours now.
Yes. Let's see. All right. Well, that was really cool. Do you have anything you want to add, Ashley?
No, my niece did really well, but I was also one of those people who taped up every scene and did get some mold.
Uh-huh.
But
Was it much?
it was black, but the basic seemed to mind, and I've just been
Oh, yeah.
airing it out all stuff.
On the
And I'm gonna put it back on.
Top.
In where all the scenes were almost, like I think I put a shim. Cause maybe I put in a candy board or something, so I had a shim, and so around the shim, it was black mold.
So where do you live? Where's
I'm in Summit County,
Yeah, up in Kansas or Woodland or?
yeah, yeah.
I had wrapped the seams of with, you know, that plastic wrap that's for moving.
Oh, yeah.
But I also use that to hold the foam board on the outside, it works pretty great for that.
Well,
Yeah.
if you use your equipment long enough, that the bees have a good coating of propolis on all your footwear, that'll hold down. That can help control the back to you.
All right. Excellent. Well, we have, next month will be our last meeting of the year because our final get together will be the banquet in November. And Seth is going to be, hopefully, did he ever get back to you? Get back to us about the technology he's been using about how the bees respond to mite treatments. So hopefully we'll have that to share with you.
Got to speed that.
All right, good. We got someone on the inside. If you need a mentor, there's some new people, or at least one new person here. If you are interested in having someone help you get set up for winter, please contact Jen Hein1@gmail.com, and she'll be able to hopefully set you up with someone who lives in your area. If you've missed, yeah,
You know Belden Sorensen?
yes.
Yeah, so he's my.
Well, there you're in good hands.
Premium quality there.
And if you want to check out any of our presentations from this year, we have a YouTube channel, and Gree has been putting everything online for us. So you can check that out. Sure. Whoops. Did you get what you needed? Okay. Except now I'm sliding through slides. Okay. Yes, so
Volunteer to go to the fair, but since I'm so new, I wasn't pointing the answers.
I went last year, and my wife and I, we're not beekeepers yet, and we went and we just took care of them for 4 hours, it was great, actually.
Yeah,
6
it's really
hours.
fun. You don't have to be an expert.
We don't have to know things.
Well, if it's in growing giant pumpkins, I can help you, okay?
okay. Well, they were next door to us, so
For last year, took second in the state, working under contract.
Do you know Owen Perry? Do you know Owen Perry?
Oh, okay, I know.
Owen has won the giant pumpkin contest several years in a row. He's a beekeeper. He doesn't come to the meetings very often.
Well.
He lives out in Magna or Curran someplace.
Well, to win the contest is debatable. okay?
Yeah, right.
In that, there's a real contest and then there's the state fair, so. You know, if you go to the real contest, I mean, this person's gonna bring one from Virgil and he's got a 2,500 pounder, he's gonna win $5,000 in Logan on Saturday. So, yeah, but they have like a
But does he
real.
get a $5
That's the thing where after they weigh them and everything, they almost try to like the road races. Yeah.
Yeah, I have pictures of me in Sugar Park in the pond.
excellent.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to thank everyone for everything they did, bringing their family, taking shifts, extra shifts. The number of people who came and visited, it would come in, I don't know if you experienced this, but there'd be like just this rush of people. And you're crazy busy for 40 minutes, and then suddenly nobody's in the building. And that's when most of these pictures were taken. But it was an amazing year. We had so many people come through. We went through all of our stickers. We went through most of our honey sticks. And yeah, it was, I think, certainly successful in terms of outreach and getting people maybe to be able to differentiate between a honeybee and a wasp.
No one tells you to shut up about bees.
No, they're all excited.
Well, are we supposed to try to kill wasps, or are we just, they kind of are pests who fight it?
Yep, but they're also pollinators. They're part of the food chain, so.
Aphids and other, bugs and things, but yeah, if they get aggressive towards your colony, you have to be really careful because they'll rob your colony out in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I had 11 little wasp nests in the eaves around my back porch, and I have 2 hives in the same area. Didn't have a single problem. Mhm. They are. Yes. We had someone send me an email to make us aware of the Utah Honey Harvest Festival. And so I thought I would show some information. They have a fiddle contest, and they've got a bunch of people that will be playing. There is another honey contest. Yes, Mike.
Location of those,
Oh, this is, yeah, so it's,
The 392 West.
yes. Thank you. Yes, Grantsville.
Farm or something like that.
So, and they have a honey contest. This is the information. You can bring it in on Friday, the 11th, or before noon on Saturday. So they have judges, but they also have like People Choice Awards. So that might be kind of fun. They also have an art contest using seeds that are pollinated. Where the plant needs to be pollinated to produce the seeds, and you get a foam board and you make some design out of seeds, and that also gets judged. So stuff for you, stuff for your kids. And then if you're interested in vending or selling honey there, here's some information about the costs and who to contact. All right, so I received an email from Jenna Crowder. She's one of the state bee inspectors, asking for our club's feedback and input on what the new rules and regulations for the state are going to be. And so I thought I'd provide you with some background information. So in March, we had an amendment essentially to a 2017 bill that was passed, the Utah Bee Inspection Act. And it was pretty simple, and you can read it online, but it essentially outlined the roles of who was going to be doing the rulemaking. And then 2 other basic things. One, we can't use skeps in the state of Utah to keep bees because you can't open them up, and it looks like this. Yeah, so that you can inspect and for disease. And that I also stipulated that if you have disease, that you need, that it's your responsibility to contact the state bee inspectors, and that you must follow the directions. So depending upon the disease, it would either be some sort of treatment, which the state would help you with, or the state would help you with burning your materials or burying it to contain the disease. And so Representative Schiff and Senator Winterton decided to make some amendments. And it has two basic parts. One is that it prohibits the regulation of beekeeping by local governments or HOAs.
Especially.
I guess, and there's some provisos in there, which, oh, it's coming up. And then the other thing is that the UDAF, Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, has to form a committee. They have to meet this year and come with some unifying rules and regulations for the state. So what?
Where's it coming?
Yeah.
You would have to ask Rex and Ronald to know why.
I'm guessing it comes from the fact that over time, like at one time when I was a really new beekeeper, like Murray tried to outlaw beekeeping in their city limits. And, you know, HOAs all come up with their own dumb rules and, you know, so I think that the issue is that when, you know, like if they call us, I say call the department back. I'm not gonna like answer phone calls about.
Yeah, I think it's just to streamline it so
I
there.
think it's just to put it all streamlined and have, you know, across the county or the state or whatever, the same rules.
So what are some of the things they're going to be looking at? And these are some of the points which they would love to have feedback, and a lot of feedback from all the backyard beekeepers, which is number of hives permitted per unit. And that's different depending on what county you're in. So Salt Lake County, if you have less than half an acre, you can have up to 5 hives on your property. And once you get over that half acre lot size, then you can move up to 10 hives on your property, for example.
The survey, there was a survey posted on the Facebook.
That was different. That was for thriving hives. That was for looking at how the USU Extension Office and how their educational thing is. Could be, but their goals were different.
It's a thing, that's the 50 questions. The regulation is for the HOAs, and the cities themselves cannot have regulations. It's a state regulation, or that's what they're trying to do.
That's what they're trying to do, right? Sorry, go ahead.
There will be state regulations, and kind of like when we get information from the FDA, we can make regulations that are less strict, but we can't make them more strict. That's what the state is proposing. So streamline the process, streamline the complaint process, I would imagine. And that way there are clear rules to point at saying, sorry, your neighbor is allowed to have bees, or whatever it is. Location of the hives on a property. Right? Some places you have to be 5 feet away from the property line. Some places it's 15 feet away from the property line. Does it matter? My perspective, for example, is it all depends on which way the hive is facing. You can have it right on the property line if there are 2 garages on 2 sides of that hive and the flight line is across your property and not across someone else's. So these are the types of things they want to hear about.
Front yard versus backyard. I mean, that's just people who do have them in their front yard and their side yard. So yeah, I mean, I think, and I think that's what we need to give them is like get really specific on that kind of stuff and like what we don't want them to outlaw front yard. If your front yard is, you know, however many far from a public sidewalk, then you should be able to have them in your front yard, you know, but.
Right, so these are the main points that came out of the bill. You can look at it, but these are what I pulled out. It does not restrict or expand any private property rights. It's all based upon the stuff with a beehive and beekeeping, but they're really starting to look at swarm prevention and how to prevent swarms from happening and to reduce your bees or honeybees in general being a nuisance for neighborhoods. But there's lots and lots of ideas, and I'm hoping everyone, I'll be sending out an email, but I'm hoping everyone will take a moment and put in their 2 cents because you guys all have valuable experience. So the purpose It's to develop best beekeeping standards for municipalities and other governmental organizations to follow when restricting beekeeping. So the result is, like I just said a moment ago, is that these ordinances or these rules and regulations cannot be stricter. You know, you can't have an HOA have stricter rules than the state imposes.
That's good, because once the people making the regulations gets too small of a group, they're not gonna be informed, you know?
Mhm.
At the extreme, you have like one angry person. who-
Right.
who Got stung once and. is on-
Just give your name
Fire
or a
watch.
bottle of honey.
Her
and you're
name's
good.
Karen. And she lives
No.
across the street.
All right, so who is on the committee? It's going to be the state bee inspectors. That's Jenna and Joey. And they're asking us to be a part of the conversation. And I'm assuming that that Jenna contacted the other bee groups in the state. And then it's going to, they said, which I thought was kind of strange, a majority of the bee inspectors, the county bee inspectors. But of course, not all counties in the state have a bee inspector. So hopefully most of them. And then whoever these people are, someone representing county government and municipal government. So like I said, the report is due the end of the year, and they will be implemented by April 30th of the next year. Of course not. I would think, I don't know, whatever you think is important, I would make comments about it. Because, you know, we each have our own set of ideas about what's important or what's really influencing the health of honeybees in the state. So I think everybody's input would be great. Yeah, so if you and I've got the next slide will show you where you can find all this information in terms of like, what does your county, what are the rules and regs for your county? When you do respond, make sure you include what city you live in. So if you want to, so there's a PDF that lists all the current rules and regs for the entire state broken down by county. And then you can look at the amendment as well. That won't provide too much information. I've given you the highlights, but the Utah beekeeping ordinances, I think would be helpful for you to look at. So everyone had a chance to take a picture? All right, so how can you submit your comments? You can send them directly to Jenna, or you can send them to Wasatch Beekeepers. And if you want to be like totally anonymous, I will compile all of your comments. I won't make any editorial changes. I may just organize it by county or by city, and then I will send them to Jenna. So she would like them back by October 10th. I have a feeling by the end of October, the committee's going to start meeting and discussing all this good stuff. Any questions? All right. And speaking of which, if you are uncertain about what's happening with your hive, Joey's got one last inspection cycle, I guess. He's going to be in Salt Lake County, October 30th, and can come to your property if you've made an appointment. So here again is the web address to sign up for an appointment, or you can email them or call them. All right, so we have one more presentation tonight by our youth beekeeper, Belle Edge. And I would like to welcome her to speak to us this evening. Do you want me to go to the Google Slides? Well, I didn't download them because I wasn't sure when you would be done. So let's see here.
Is there video with sound on it? Okay, I'm gonna recommend that you turn off your speaker and give her this microphone.
Whoops. Okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll do one task at a time. Let's see.
They'll feel more important if you got that microphone.
Are you turned off on yours?
How do I?
Oh, I duplicated the slide. Let me delete that. I completely forgot about that.
It's okay, you know, I just.
Click twice when you get to that.
Test that microphone.
I just take it off. Your camera.
Turn off.
Best.
Just delete that.
But you can put that on.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah. Okay. I can't control them. You're the one casting. Yeah, I just have this so I know what I'm saying. Yeah. My beekeeping journey, everything I've done so far this year, like what I've learned, all that. My name is Belle. I'm 15. I go to Summit Academy High School. It's over in Bluffdale. I play an awful amount of instruments. Shouldn't be a thing, but it is. I'm in my school's German immersion program. I've been to Germany a couple of times with my school on school trips. I'm in the Draper City Mayor's Youth Council. I really love all things sciencey, so bugs just came naturally. Like, I'm all over it. It's fun. It's cool. I like to draw, read, bike a lot. Yeah. How did it start? So I've always been a very outdoorsy kid. Loved playing with bugs in the yard, like staring at leaves, like all that kind of stuff. So when I found out about this, I had to hop on it as soon as possible. Like, my mom brought it up and I was like, get me the information, like, now. And I was one of the first ones with my application in. What have I learned? I've learned a lot. The biggest thing is how crucial it is to be adaptable. It's been a pretty iffy year. 6 queens? I think we're at 6. No clue what I did, but yeah, it's been a thing. So I've really had to learn how important it is to just adapt and persevere, and just, like, whether it's a swarm call or realizing it's laying worker number 2. Yeah. That's the duplicate slide, I believe. I accidentally deleted the picture instead of the slide. I also learned just how important it is to make sure I've got a good attitude. Always got to look on the bright side of things with everything that's going on, whether it's the fact the swarm is actually 2 stories up in that tree and we have to duct tape the bucket. Just making sure, look on the bright side, just keep going for the bees. And that is from an actual swarm call I went on with Julie. That was my first swarm call. And if you look there, that's where the swarm was. We did that. It was like 10 pounds of bees.
Dropping fast and getting dark, like 8 something at night.
It was like 6 or 7. Yeah.
It was. Laid there on the ground. It was just a mess. So, but we got him. Yeah.
No, eventually one of the neighbors got on the ladder because I work on 2 ladders. I can't do it. So we had him up on the ladder and then we had to help and pull the pole down after it was full of all. It was a thing for sure.
The first bang we did to get him into the bucket, it was a wide one, so they didn't all go in the bucket. A lot of them rained down on her head, and like she was like, we're looking up, and all of a sudden she's like, she did so well. I was so proud of her.
Everywhere.
Yeah, bee poop that was her first experience with bee poop.
Really important thing about this experience is community. It's just incredible getting to know all sorts of people from all different walks of life. Like beekeeping is a really niche thing, but you get like so many different people from it. And it's just so cool to see how willing everyone is to like help others and share their experiences, because we all just want for our bees to do good. And I'm so grateful for these two. They've been helping me loads with my bees and all their nonsense, so I appreciate it. And just, yeah, I'm really grateful that this was an opportunity I was able to have. Thank you for your time. How many bees?
How many colonies?
Oh, just the one.
You have the one?
Yeah.
And the swarm that you got out of the tree, did it survive?
That's a
Yeah, it was at my house, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That went into my house. So when her bees went laying worker the second time,
It was like 3 frames of bees left.
yeah, it was just like she'd been to Germany and came home, and like they were great before she left, and they
Yeah.
came home and they were just a
I was
mess.
putting
So
on like 3 weeks.
yeah, it wasn't, we don't know exactly what happened, but because we had pictures before then of the queen and everything looked beautiful, and she just comes to Germany and it's just like, what happened? So, we actually, while I was at her house trying to decide what to do with these lane workers, again, we got a swarm call. And they happened to be right behind in a house in a grapevine on a low.
That one was so nice.
Fence. Yeah, it was on a low fence, it was easy to get, but it was a house right behind Seth Homer's house. So we decided they were really Seth's bees, but we got them. So those bees did pretty well until, what happened to them? Did they just dwindle? I can't remember. Oh, the queen, yeah, the queen.
The queen
Yeah.
like disappeared, I think. And
Yeah,
then we put a new,
raise another queen.
no, we put a new queen in, she was marked. And then the next time we got into the bees, she was nowhere to be found, and then we found an unmarked queen that the bees had made. And then she wasn't doing good, so we combined with this.
Yes, we ended up, in the end, what she has now is one of the school hives combined with the wheat hive that we still have left of her house. So we're
They were
praying we
so
can get
bad.
another winter.
Everywhere.
So it's been an experience for her first year beekeeping. I can't say it's what I had hoped for her, but she's been a trooper, man. She has been a trooper.
Thank you very much. That's fun. Right, well, speaking of fun, Saturday, November 9th is our banquet. 6 to 9, it will be potluck dinner. And silent auction. And some type of honey tasting, maybe contest, we're not. But we desperately need auction items. If you can, it would be great if you could bring them to next month's meeting. And then I will bring them all with me when I set up. But it can be bee themed, bee related, be stuff that you've had and you would like to get rid of. Additional beekeeping stuff, it could be non-beekeeping stuff. It needs to be experiential. Let's say you have an extractor, you want to have a honey extracting party next summer. It could be something that's for the future. Or maybe, you know, you sew or you quilt or you knit or paint and you want to have like an experience where you teach people how to do something new. That would be a great option. Or maybe you just host a dinner. You make homemade pasta or whatever. People just come and bring food, and you guys hang out, get to meet one another. So something like that. It can be something that was homemade. Last year we had people bringing in pickles. jam and other stuff that they had made, and that was really wonderful. We had Sandy, who made this beautiful wooden bench. So homemade items are also something that would be great, maybe for items for adults, children, your pets, whatever. But we definitely need stuff to make our party a party. And of course, the big event that nobody ever wants to talk about are the elections. And that will be after we eat, so hopefully everybody will be in a good mood. Those people who have an asterisk by their name are willing to run for re-election. So that means we need a president, we need a vice president, we need a secretary, and someone to take care of emails and contacting the public, our PR person. So I know it seems a bit overwhelming that both the president, vice president, secretary are not going to be there, but you have people who've been on the board before. And it's always great to have new energy, new ideas, new input, vision for what you want to do the next year. But we definitely are going to have people take these roles on the club won't go forward. And then we have a whole suite of officers. Luckily, most people are interested in continuing in our current role. But both the mentoring coordinator and apiary coordinator, we're gonna need some. Jen can mentor someone while you're learning how to pair people up. It's a fairly simple process, right? And of course, the people that work in the apiary, you're just taking care of the hives. We're gonna be downsizing our hives. We started with 7, and we're gonna go through winter with 3 of those hives. So it should be more manageable for next year. And then we're gonna need people for our education program. We're getting many more education teachers and places like Gateway that wanna start having in-person experiential learning experiences. Julie and Walt will continue mentoring their youth beekeepers next year. So we're going to need 2 new people if we want to continue with our youth beekeeping program, to take on another junior high and high school student. And then definitely going to need someone to help me to set up the fair, and Jen will need someone, to bounce ideas off of it to develop more of our educational curriculum. So that means we need 13 people, 13 at least.
You're
more multiple roles, but it's certainly it's much easier if we have more people, because that way, instead of it taking up, like 8 hours a week of my time because I'm doing all these different roles, it would just be maybe an hour or half an hour a week. Any questions?
Will you give some like descriptions of what president, vice president, secretary?
Yes, so
week to
that's
week or month to month?
That's in August. There were slides that outlined all of that. The bylaws are up on our website where you can see another description, or you can email to Wasatch Beekeepers and just put in, you're interested in talking to the treasurer or the mentor coordinator to learn more about it. And then some of us are here tonight, so if you're interested in talking to people about what they do and how hard it is, whether or not it's something you could do without too much stress, talk to us after tonight's meeting or in October or on November 9th at Bigway. All right, so let's talk about what's going on in the apiary, what you should be thinking about. I'm sure you've noticed that population.
You want to turn your microphone back on?
How's that? Population in your hive is going to continue to decrease. The queen is going to continue to slow her egg laying. So when you do inspections, well, I'll talk about that later. And I'm looking at 11 hives that I'm taking care of right now. I don't see any drones. Some people have loads of drones still in their hive, but they will continue to be pushed out of the hive, certainly by the end of October. And workers have begun to bring in larger amounts of propolis. So this is to seal the cracks, to reduce the drafts in winter. And then there's all sorts of really interesting articles. If you use Google Scholar as your search engine rather than just regular Google, and you put in, you know, bacterial infections and propolis, you'll see all sorts of interesting articles about how propolis protects the hive against a variety of pathogens. So don't scrape it off, leave it in your hive.
I just saw a new, like it was new, hive boxes that are rough on the inside.
Yeah, I've seen it.
So that will propolis to the rough spot.
I sprayed the inside of all mine before I put them on.
Yeah, I
So
used to
they
do
feel good.
too, but I thought.
I've seen that too. I saw, there was a pamphlet at the Utah Bee Association.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and I was like, oh,
It's
it's only
named
got like a little brood in. Or I can see it.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Finished on the outside.
Yeah, it looks the same on the outside, it's just a rough.
So there's more place for them to put it. Yeah, historically, honeybees in the US have been, and I think broadly, been bred to not produce propolis because it's such a pain to deal with when it's hot and everything's sticky. And as soon as it touches something, then it's sticky forever. But then you start seeing an increase in pathogens in your hives. And so, yeah, I think the pendulum is swinging the other way, and people are now devising ways to get more of it in the hive.
So you can buy propolis traps and they go on your top box, between there and like your cupboard. And I was actually just talking to David Finch because I've had a lot of people ask me for propolis lately. And I don't scrape my hives because I want my hives to be healthy. And so, David Finch was at, did they just have Wyoming Bee College? Is that what just happened? He was at some
I don't know.
bee conference thing. And he said there was a guy there that spoke on propolis in the hive, and he keeps propolis traps on all of his hives all the time. And
I bought one, so I'm afraid
I've
to
got
use
some,
it.
but I haven't used them.
Because I
But-
have bees to put purpose in the hot. I feel bad taking it.
So what he does is then he rotates them out. So he'll take them out, you freeze them, and then you crack them. If you want to keep the propolis, you freeze them and then you whack them on the counter and get all the propolis out, and then you can put them back in the hive. But he rotates propolis traps in his colonies all year long. And so I bought a whole bunch of them, and Dave's gonna put them in some of his hives for me. And he's like, if it makes my hives healthier, because this guy firmly believes that the propolis traps make his hive healthy.
By taking them out and removing the propolis.
And Carniolan are big propolis gatherers, so
Yeah.
they're.
Well, I think he leaves them in long enough that it's not, it's not like he's not taking it all the time from them.
But
He leaves them for a period of time, and then he'll take it out and then give them some new, let them make new.
how would it help the hive by?
By removing it?
Yeah.
Well, they fill it back up again, so I think in a very short period of time, they fill it back up again. Evidently, fall is the best time to put in a propolis trap if you're interested in doing.
But what is he doing with the propolis?
Selling it.
Oh,
See, it's not like, pollen, if you have a pollen trap, then you're stealing pollen from the bees. But if you've got the propolis in, they're already bringing propolis in, they'll just take the extra, put it in, it's not gonna deprive them of having enough propolis.
They have. I wish they had less. But I don't know, it just kind of smooth it down before I put everything back together.
all right. So hopefully your honey supers are off and your mite treatments are on. I was looking at the Utah ordinances for beekeeping, and almost every county has it a statement in there that you have to provide water on your property for your bees. So if you haven't thought about it, or you haven't already provided water for your bees on your property, this is a good time to do it.
Have it before they start flying in the spring,
Mhm.
because once they've gone to your neighbor's pool, you're not gonna get them to come back.
That's right, yeah. So to habituate them to come and get a nice free water source close to their hive. Make sure to check your brood pattern and the amount of brood. If you see queen but few eggs, there's a couple of reasons why that could be. It's possible that the humidity and the water, that they don't have enough water, so the humidity's not right, so the nurse bees are cannibalizing larvae instead of raising them. It could be that that your hive doesn't have enough pollen. Pollen is absolutely necessary for the nurse bees to produce the royal jelly. And I was just reading at Randy Oliver's website, Scientific Beekeeping. I didn't realize that nurse bees also feed all of the adult bees. So the adult bees are still getting royal jelly, and they're still getting that important protein resource. And so when you're adding pollen substitute, or you're looking for those pollen reserves in the hive, therefore the nurse bees to be able to function properly and to be able to feed everyone. So that could be another reason why. It could be that you have a new queen and she hasn't started laying yet, or she is laying very few eggs. But now is an important time to keep track of what is the health, and, take notes. Where do you see your brood? Is it closer to the east side of the hive, the west side? How many frames actually have brood? Because these are the bees that are going to be your winter bees. So if you have a low population going into winter, you have a lower probability of having a live hive as you come out of winter. So I haven't been able to find an actual citation. So Peggy was talking about, they leave 60 to 100 pounds of honey on their hives. I've always heard here, 60 to 80 pounds.
Doesn't get to 50 degrees here, like it's not.
No, but I just, I don't know. So I was just gonna survey you guys. How much honey do you leave on your hive to be successful?
80 to 100.
You do. And what do you come out?
And the bank.
Right, okay.
I really want to.
I feed starting the 1st of October until they won't take anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I try to, I want like 2 mediums full of honey, not in the mediums, but about that amount. It's about 100 pounds.
Okay.
But
yes,
I don't feed them.
The important thing is that on the second box, they've got honey in the center of it. Because they're gonna start out down here, and as they go up, if there's nothing in that second box, they'll die. Even though there's honey here and here, they only go straight up.
so what about those hives where the bees have already moved up? Like, I think 7 of the hives that I'm taking care of, bees are already mostly up in the top.
To force them down.
To force them down. All right, well, I'm feeding.
Where do you get your pollen substitute?
I ordered it from, and this is the first year I've ever given pollen, just because I didn't see any in these hives. And I got it from the bee supply from Blake Shook's in Texas, his company.
Just called Bee Supply.
The bee supply. Yeah. And they offer a variety of different kinds of pollen substitute. I try to catch his monthly webinar. Very, very informative. And he was, and you pay a lot more for 15% pollen than you do for, but it's more important where there's hive beetle to make sure that pollen substitute is consumed rapidly, like within 7 days. But we don't have pollen or the hive beetles here. So 4%, or the cheap stuff, cheaper, I should say, is just fine.
Are you feeding pollen substitute now, or are they bringing in pollen?
I see workers coming in with pollen, but there's like nothing in the school hives. There's essentially no pollen. So I've been feeding them a quarter of a full patty, which is about this big, once a week. It's gone. Yeah.
Can you tell now that they're storing it?
When I inspect on Monday,
I've read they don't store it.
I'll have to look. Yeah, Monday I'm doing a full inspection before I leave, so I'll be able to answer that. If you've got honey still, extract it while it's warm on these. We've got some days getting up into the 80s. Otherwise, you're going to have to save it or go to Deseret Hive Supply and use their heated kitchen because it's impossible to extract cold honey. And you need to develop a plan. What's your plan? What's your plan to deal with mice, wind, water, condensation, cold temperatures? So depending upon what you see are the threats to your hive, getting those mouse guards, figuring out what your windbreak is going to be. Are you going to insulate the sides to provide a windbreak? Do you provide a wooden shelter around them? Veldon has like a 3-sided lean-to that he uses for his hives. You'll want to
Made out of pallets. Yeah, so it just has a pallet there and a pallet there and a pallet underneath them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going to want to elevate the rear of the hive slightly so that any moisture that comes in from rain or from condensation can easily drain out the front. And at a minimum, you're going to want to insulate your lid. And yeah, I guess think about all the pros and cons, mostly pros for insulating that Peg was telling us about tonight. But again, it all depends on what microclimate your hives are in. So how do you prepare for a successful winter? You're proactive rather than reactive. So you've kept your mite populations low. They've got honey, they've got pollen, and maybe you're going to think about a candy board or a quilt board. And so we're not doing a formal workshop this year, but we were going to provide the recipe. Julie, do you have the recipe?
But I can tell, I have it right here. Sorry, I'm in La La Land over here.
With some essential oil for the smell.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very simple.
Yeah, I can do that. So if you want me to just give you a quick rundown for those of us that are here. And
sure.
We can publish it. The ones we do, when we've done candy board workshops are 20 pounds of sugar. But so you can take this and cut it based on, if you only want 10, you can cut it in half. So 20 pounds of sugar, 3.5 cups of water, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, and he always uses the Bragg's apple cider vinegar, which is like with the mother or whatever they call it. And then a tablespoon of Nosebit, which is it's a product you can get at Man Lake or probably Amazon, who knows, but it's a product that helps with dysentery or nosema in your hive. Because a lot of times when they start consuming solids coming out of winter, then it causes diarrhea or dysentery in your hive. So it's supposed to help with that. There's a product that's called Complete, and it is essentially Nosebit, but it's really expensive. So we talked about, you buy a bottle and share it or something and get it together. And then a tablespoon of either Honey Bee Healthy or Deseret Hive makes their own version called Deseret Bee Healthy. You can make your own. It's essentially essential oils like wintergreen oil and thyme oil and I don't know what else. Homer's Honeybees has a recipe for it on his website. But that's the recipe. 20 pounds of sugar, 3.5 cups of water, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, and then optional is the tablespoon of Nosebit or Complete and a tablespoon of Deseret Bee Healthy.
Stir it up and let it dry.
You stir it up, so you just stir it up like wet sand, just put it all in a bowl, or, I mean, you can actually, so if you get your candy board or your sim, and you can make it just, you can get a box and then the queen excluder on the bottom, and nail the queen excluder to the box, and then lay your wax paper on the bottom, and then dump your sugar in, and then dump the liquid stuff in, and then stir it around until it's like wet sand, like you're gonna make a sand castle. Once it's all evenly wet, then you don't wanna pack it hard, because it makes it harder for the bees to get it in the spring. But, evenly spread it out in the box, and then make a couple of holes, kind of fist-sized holes, where the bees can come up. And in those holes, then tear out the wax paper, so they can come up through those spaces. And the other reason you want holes in there is also for ventilation, right? So, so you're not ending up without the bees being able to, the moisture kind of hits that sugar and then makes it wet, and then it brings down syrup on it. So, yeah, and some people just make one big square hole in the middle, or, it just has to have some kind of hole in the middle, and let it dry for about a week, and it'll get pretty hard. And then you can stick it on your hives whenever. Some people will put a pollen patty. I've seen recipes where, like, they put half the sugar down, and then they put pieces of a pollen patty kind of around it, and then they put the rest of the sugar on top. So as the bees are eating through it, they can get to the pollen patty in there. I mean, there's all different kinds of things. You don't want to put a pollen patty in it probably too, and if you're gonna put your sugar board on it now, or, soon, I wouldn't put pollen patties in it yet. I mean, although you said you are feeding pollen, but the problem is you don't want to try to raise a bunch of brood when it's, December or January.
Yeah, the reason why I added the pollen, I've been adding it, is for the last 4 weeks is,
There wasn't even hot.
yeah, and I want those the bees that they're raising to be healthy. Because if they don't have good nutrition as larvae, right, they're not gonna have those good fat reserves as adults.
They store, you may reduce the amount of forage pollen they have to eat, they store that.
Sure, I just wanted to make sure the nurse bees had enough nutrition to make good quality food to feed the larvae, so. But apparently if you insulate well, you don't need a candy board.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Well, more general question. Was production down a little this summer because of the heat and the dry conditions?
Mhm.
I mean, I got a third of the honey. I got 700 pounds last year, and from 4 hives. And this year, 8 hives, I might get 300 pounds. And was it just a hard year?
Yeah, it dried out early.
And I hate to say this, every hive I got from Homer this last year was a dud.
Well, I think it was just overall, it was a hot summer, and I mean, across the board, I know Jerry's.
I only
had
got
very little
20%
honey, I got very
production.
little honey, everybody that calls the beeline, they're like, how come I have no honey? Like, it's across the board, which is really interesting, because we had good spring rains.
Yeah, there was I have a map of the heat index. The entire country's having this problem. It's not just Utah or our region of Utah.
The month of June that just comes in, and this year, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
Well, is it because, I mean, we had a relatively dry winter in the valley. And there was just not enough moisture in the soil to produce those early plants that we normally get. I mean, that's what I am thinking, but, and then, I don't know, I hate to be critical of Homer, but he had a difficult time getting us our hives early enough for them to catch some of that early.
And that's because of the weather in California.
Right.
And it's because as climate change continues, the wet season in the spring is pushed back. And so that pushes back everything else. Yeah.
And it wasn't just Homer that got his bees out of, pollination.
Yeah, David Bench had problems too. Yeah, and I can't find it. I had it up for like a week and I'm like, oh, I got to add this to my presentation. And now I can't find the screenshot, but it's a heat map. And it's looking at, so one of the things that Blake Shook was talking about earlier this month and during his webinar was the drought conditions across continental US. Everyone's experiencing drought conditions and higher than normal temperatures. So yeah, so the plants are going to shut down. They're going to, the nectar is either going to be less or yeah,
Well,
so
usually in August, I'll have bearding. Last year on the front of my hives, they'd be bearded 2 to 3 inches deep, the whole front of the hive. This year there was no bearding on any of my hives.
Same thing with me, but.
Yeah, it was just, the honey production was just.
So it was low for everybody.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, now-
When I got extracting, I thought, you know, I'm kind of glad it brought so much honey.
Yeah, yeah. But Blake said he's been hearing from people all over the nation and they're all reporting the same trend.
You're sorry about that? Well, I thought I had finally learned about the, you know, what to do.
They say it everywhere.
This was left at our bee booth at the fair. Did anyone lose? Guess I should show the people on Zoom line if there's anyone else out there. Nice water bottle. And I know this is a little late, but this goes with the Hive, the frame building tool that someone bought at our auction last year. And Jerry made these pieces to go in it. And I have yet to find out who's missing their pieces from their frame assembling unit. But I will bring it to the banquet and hopefully find. Any other questions, comments?
Pretty good, those are really good for storm fighting.
Yes, they are. So are surveying stakes. All right, well, thank you very much. And we will see you October 24th.
Thank you, Nicole.
Okay, and would you, this is a thank you card for Peg.